I'm 86 years old, and I need to tell you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. Everything you think you know about success is a lie. And the worst part, I spent 70 years of my life believing that same lie, and it cost me the only thing that actually mattered. You see, I built a fortune worth $300 million. I had the penthouse apartment, the vacation homes, the private yacht. People magazine called me a business legend. Forbes put me on their cover twice. Young entrepreneurs would pay thousands just to have lunch with me and learn my secrets. But here's what nobody knew. While I was building that empire, while I was collecting those awards and giving those speeches about success, my wife was dying inside. And by the time I figured it out, it was too late to save what we had. She was gone. Not dead, just gone. And I was left with all that money and absolutely nobody to share it with. My name is William, but everyone called me Bill. And if you're watching this thinking your career is the most important thing in your life, I need you to hear my story, because I was exactly where you are. I had the same drive, the same ambition, the same absolute certainty that if I just worked hard enough, everything else would fall into place. I was wrong about everything. Let me take you back to 1958. I was 20 years old, fresh out of college, and I just married the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Her name was Margaret, but I called her Maggie. She had these bright green eyes and this laugh that could light up an entire room. When she smiled at me, I felt like I could conquer the world. We got married in a small church in Ohio. I remember standing at the altar, looking at her in that white dress and making a promise. Not just the vows we said in front of everyone, but a private promise to myself. I promised that I would give her everything. A beautiful home, financial security, a life where she'd never have to worry about anything. What I didn't understand then was that she already had everything she wanted. She had me. She had our love. She didn't need a mansion or a fortune. She just needed her husband to be present, to be there, to choose her every single day. But I was 20 years old, and I thought I knew better. The first few years were magical. We lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery. I was working at a small accounting firm, making barely enough to pay the bills, but we were happy. We'd cook dinner together every night, talk for hours about our dreams, make plans for the future. So we'd take long walks on Sunday afternoons, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. Maggie would wait up for me when I worked late, which wasn't often back then. She'd have a cup of coffee ready, and we'd sit at our little kitchen table, and she'd tell me about her day. She worked at the local library, and she'd share stories about the people who came in, the children she helped with their homework, the elderly folks who just wanted someone to talk to. I loved those conversations. I loved hearing her voice, seeing her face light up when she talked about something that mattered to her. I loved the way she'd reach across the table and touch my hand when she was making a point. I loved the way she'd laugh at my terrible jokes. But somewhere along the way, I started believing that love wasn't enough. In 1961, I got my big break. A client offered me a chance to invest in a small manufacturing company. It was risky, but I saw the potential. I convinced Maggie to let me use our entire savings, $5,000, to buy in as a partner. She was scared. She'd grown up during the Depression, and the idea of risking everything we had terrified her, but she believed in me. She trusted me. So she said yes. That investment changed everything. The company took off. Within 2 years, I'd made back our initial investment 10 times over. By 1965, I was worth more than $1 million. We moved out of that little apartment and into a beautiful house in the suburbs. Maggie should have been thrilled. We had everything we dreamed about. Financial security, a gorgeous home, respect in the community. But I started noticing something was different. She seemed quieter, more distant. When I'd ask her what was wrong, she'd smile and say she was fine. But she wasn't fine, and neither was I, though I didn't realize it yet. Success is addictive. That first $1 million felt incredible, but then I needed $2 million, then 5, then 10. There was always another deal, another opportunity, another mountain to climb, and each success made me hungry for more. I started working longer hours, traveling more, missing dinners, missing weekends, missing the small moments that had made our marriage so special. But I told myself it was all for her, for us, for our future. The truth is, it was for me, for my ego. For the rush I got when people called me brilliant, when newspapers wrote articles about my business acumen, when other wealthy men wanted to be in my circle. By 1970, we'd been married 12 years, and I was worth $20 million. We had a mansion with 8 bedrooms, a summer house in the Hamptons, and a staff of 6 people. Maggie had everything money could buy. Except she didn't have me. I remember one evening in particular. It was our wedding anniversary, our 15th. I'd promised Maggie we'd go to dinner, just the 2 of us, like we used to do. She'd bought a new dress, done her hair, and she looked absolutely stunning. But at 5 o'clock, I got a call. A deal I'd been working on for months was falling apart, and I needed to get on a plane to Chicago immediately. I told Maggie we'd celebrate when I got back. It would just be a few days. When I walked through that door and saw the look on her face, I should have canceled the trip. I should have told my assistant to handle it. I should have chosen my wife over that deal, but I didn't. I kissed her cheek, told her she looked beautiful, and promised we'd make it up when I returned. Then I grabbed my suitcase and headed to the airport. The deal was successful. I made $3 million in 4 days, but when I came home, Maggie had taken off her wedding ring. It was sitting on the kitchen counter next to a note that said, "I can't compete with your ambition anymore." She hadn't left, not yet. But something fundamental had shifted. The woman who used to wait up for me with coffee now went to bed early. The woman who used to tell me about her day now just asked about mine out of politeness. The woman who used to laugh at my jokes now just smiled politely and changed the subject. I told myself it was a rough patch. All marriages go through difficult periods. Once I closed a few more deals, once we had enough money that I could slow down, everything would go back to the way it was. But money doesn't fix what money breaks. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. The most painful way possible. By 1975, I was worth $50 million, and I was the loneliest man in America. Maggie and I were living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, but we were strangers. We'd perfected the art of polite conversation. "How was your day?" "Fine." "How was the meeting?" "Good." "Pass the salt." "Thank you." But we never talked. Not really. Not the way we used to. I'd come home from another business trip to find her reading in the living room. She'd look up, smile, ask if I was hungry. I'd say no, that I'd eaten on the plane. She'd nod and go back to her book. I'd head to my office to review contracts or make calls to Tokyo or London. Different time zones meant I could work around the clock. Some nights, I'd catch glimpses of the woman I'd married. She'd be in the garden, tending to her roses, and for a moment her face would soften. She'd look peaceful, content. But the moment she saw me watching, the walls would go back up. I started staying later at the office. It was easier than coming home to that polite silence. At work, people hung on my every word. I was important, respected, needed. At home, I felt like an intruder in my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I couldn't buy back my wife's smile. I could acquire companies worth hundreds of millions, but I couldn't figure out how to have a simple conversation with the woman I loved. In 1978, something happened that should have been a wake-up call. Maggie's mother died suddenly, heart attack. She was only 62. I was in Germany closing a deal when I got the call. I told Maggie I'd be on the next flight home, but there was a complication with the German deal, a legal issue that could cost us millions if not handled immediately. My lawyers said I needed to stay just one more day, just 24 hours to sort everything out. I called Maggie from my hotel room in Munich, told her about the delay, said I'd be home in time for the funeral. She didn't cry, didn't yell, just said, "I understand, Bill. Business comes first." Then she hung up. I made it to the funeral, sat in the front row next to my wife, held her hand during the service. but I wasn't really there. Part of my mind was still in Germany, thinking about contracts and negotiations and the $50 million we'd just secured. After the burial, as people came back to our house, I noticed something. Everyone gravitated toward Maggie. They hugged her, shared memories of her mother, offered comfort. She was surrounded by love and support. But nobody talked to me. I was the successful businessman standing in the corner with a drink in my hand, checking my watch, wondering when it would be appropriate to excuse myself and make some calls. That's when I realized I didn't have friends. I had business associates, people who wanted something from me, but nobody who actually cared about me as a person. Maggie had friends, real friends, women she'd known for years who called just to check in, who remembered her birthday without being reminded, who showed up when life got hard. She had a life outside of our marriage, a rich, full life. I had a company. I had employees and clients and competitors. But when the workday ended, when the deals were done and the contracts were signed, I had nothing. That night, after everyone had gone home, I found Maggie in the kitchen washing dishes. The caterers had offered to clean up, but she'd insisted on doing it herself. She always did that when she was processing grief, kept her hands busy. I picked up a dish towel and started drying. We worked in silence for a while, then she said, "My mother asked about you last month when I visited her." I waited for her to continue. "She wanted to know if you were happy. I told her you were successful. She said that wasn't what she asked." I set down the plate I was drying. "What did you tell her?" Maggie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I told her I didn't know, that I hadn't really known my own husband in years." We finished the dishes in silence. That was the last real conversation we had for months. By 1980, I was worth over $100 million. I'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine. The president had invited me to a White House dinner. I was living the American dream. But I was dying inside. And so was my marriage. Maggie had started volunteering at a women's shelter. She'd leave the house in the morning and not return until evening. When I asked her about it, she'd say she was helping women who had lost everything get back on their feet. I didn't understand the irony at the time. My wife was spending her days helping other women rebuild their lives while our own life together was crumbling. She stopped asking about my work, stopped pretending to be interested in my deals and acquisitions. She'd nod politely when I talked about business, but I could see her mind was somewhere else. We stopped having dinner together. I'd work late, grab something at the office, or eat on the plane. She'd have a quiet meal alone in our enormous dining room, reading a book or listening to music. We stopped talking about the future, about dreams and plans and hopes. We lived parallel lives in the same house, like roommates who barely knew each other. The worst part was how gradual it all was. There was no dramatic fight, no moment of crisis where everything fell apart. It was more like erosion. Day by day, year by year, we just drifted further apart until we were strangers. I told myself it was temporary, that once I reached a certain level of success, once I had enough money to feel truly secure, I'd slow down. I'd reconnect with Maggie. We'd travel together, spend time together, fall in love again. But that day never came, because there was no amount of money that felt like enough, no level of success that satisfied me. I was chasing something that didn't exist, and I was willing to sacrifice everything to catch it. In 1982, on our 24th wedding anniversary, Maggie made me dinner. She cooked my favorite meal, set the table with our good china, lit candles. When I walked in and saw what she'd done, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. We sat across from each other at that beautiful table, and she looked at me with those green eyes that had captivated me all those years ago. For a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Bill, I want a divorce." I sat there staring at her, the candlelight flickering across her face, and I couldn't process what she'd just said. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. Maggie folded her hands in her lap, the same hands I'd held on our wedding day, the same hands that had cooked thousands of meals for me, the same hands that had stopped reaching for mine years ago. I mean, I can't do this anymore, Bill. I can't pretend we're still married when we're not. We're just two people who happen to live in the same house. I wanted to argue with her, tell her she was wrong, but looking at her across that table, I realized she was absolutely right. We weren't married anymore. We were business partners in the enterprise of looking successful. But we can fix this, I said. I know I've been working too much, but the company's at a crucial stage. Just give me another year, maybe 2, and then we can... Bill. Her voice was soft but firm. You've been saying that for 15 years. There's always another deal, always another crucial stage, always another reason why now isn't the right time. She was right. I'd been making the same promise over and over, and I'd broken it every single time. I still love you, I said, and I meant it, even after all those years of neglect, even after building walls between us that seemed impossible to tear down. I loved her. I know you do, she said, and I love you too, but love isn't enough anymore. We need more than love. We need presence. We need partnership. We need to actually know each other. That night, she moved into the guest bedroom. The next week, she moved in with her sister. Within a month, she'd filed the divorce papers. I threw myself into work harder than ever. It was the only thing that made sense to me anymore, the only place where I felt competent, where I could control outcomes, where my efforts produced measurable results. The divorce was finalized in 1983. Maggie was fair about the settlement, more than fair. She took only what she needed to start over. A modest house, enough money to live comfortably. She didn't want the mansion or the vacation homes or any of the trappings of wealth. I just want my life back, she told her lawyer. On the day the divorce became official, I was in Tokyo negotiating the purchase of a steel company. When my assistant handed me the papers to sign, I was in the middle of a presentation to 20 Japanese executives. I signed my name without reading the documents, then continued with my PowerPoint about projected earnings. That night, alone in my hotel room overlooking the Tokyo skyline, it hit me. I was officially divorced. The woman I'd loved for 25 years was no longer my wife. And I was sitting in a hotel room on the other side of the world, thinking about steel prices. I called her that night. It was morning in Ohio. "Maggie," I said when she answered. "I'm sorry." There was a long pause. Then she said, "I know you are, Bill, but sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't give us back all those years." And she was right again. After the divorce, I became even more successful. Maybe it was the complete focus, or maybe it was the fact that I had nothing else in my life to distract me. By 1985, my company was worth $200 million. By 1990, it was worth $300 million. I dated occasionally. Successful women, intelligent women, beautiful women. But every relationship followed the same pattern. They'd be impressed by the wealth, excited by the lifestyle, but after a few months, they'd start complaining about the same things Maggie had complained about. I was never present, always working. Always somewhere else, even when I was sitting right next to them. None of those relationships lasted more than a year. In 1995, I got a call that changed everything. Maggie had remarried, a retired high school principal named Robert. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. I wasn't invited, of course, but my daughter called to tell me about it. Yes, we had a daughter. Sarah. I haven't mentioned her yet because that's another part of my story that fills me with regret. She was born in 1966 when Maggie and I were still happy. Or at least, when I thought we were happy. Sarah grew up in that mansion surrounded by every luxury money could buy, but she grew up without a father. Oh, I was physically present sometimes. I'd come home from business trips with expensive gifts and promises to spend more time together. But I was always distracted, always thinking about work, always getting called away for some crisis that seemed more important than my daughter's childhood. She stopped asking me to come to her school plays when she was 10, stopped inviting me to her soccer games when she was 12. By the time she was 16, we barely spoke unless it was necessary. When Maggie and I divorced, Sarah chose to live with her mother. She was 19 then, old enough to make her own decision. She said she wanted to be with the parent who had actually been present during her childhood. That hurt more than losing Maggie. Because Sarah was right. I'd missed everything. Her first steps, her first day of school, her first heartbreak. I'd been there for the big moments, the birthdays and graduations. But I'd missed the daily moments, the conversations and laughter and tears that actually build a relationship. When Sarah called to tell me about Maggie's wedding, I could hear the happiness in her voice. She was genuinely excited for her mother. Maggie had found someone who would be present, who would choose her every day, who understood that love is a verb, not just a feeling. "He's a good man, Dad," Sarah said. "He makes Mom laugh again. I haven't heard her laugh like that since I was little." That's when I realized what I'd lost. Not just a wife, but a companion. Someone who laughed at my jokes, who shared my daily experiences, who cared about my thoughts and feelings. I'd traded all of that for numbers on a bank statement. Robert, Maggie's new husband, was everything I wasn't. He was present, attentive. He remembered her birthday without his assistant reminding him. He cooked dinner with her every night. They took long walks together, traveled together, made decisions together. He was retired, so he had time. Time to listen to her stories about the women's shelter. Time to help her with her garden. Time to sit on the porch in the evening and watch the sunset. I had money. He had time. And time, it turned out, was worth infinitely more than money. In 1998, my company went public. The IPO raised $400 million. I was now worth over $500 million. Forbes called me one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America. That same year, Sarah got married. She invited me to the wedding, of course. I walked her down the aisle and gave a speech at the reception, but I could see the distance in her eyes. I was her father, but I wasn't her dad. Robert, Maggie's husband, was the one Sarah turned to for advice. He was the one who knew her hopes and dreams and fears. During the father-daughter dance, Sarah looked at me and said, "I wish we were closer, Dad." "We can be," I said. "I'm ready to try if you are." But by then, the patterns were too established. I was 70 years old, set in my ways. She was 32 with a life and family of her own. We tried to build a relationship, but it felt forced, artificial. We didn't have the foundation of shared memories and experiences that real relationships require. I started thinking about retirement around 2000. Not because I was tired, but because I was lonely. I had more money than 10 people could spend in a lifetime, but I had nobody to spend it with. Nobody who cared whether I came home at night or stayed at the office, but retirement scared me. Work was all I knew. It was my identity, my purpose, my reason for getting up in the morning. Without it, who was I? In 2003, at age 75, I finally sold the company. The sale price was $800 million. After taxes and fees, I walked away with over $600 million. I should have been ecstatic. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to achieve. I was one of the wealthiest men in America. I'd proven everyone wrong who said I'd never amount to anything. But standing in that conference room, signing the papers that transferred ownership of my life's work to someone else, I felt empty, hollow. Like I'd spent 50 years climbing a mountain only to discover there was nothing at the top. The first few months after the sale were the worst of my life. I'd wake up at 5:30 every morning just like I had for 40 years, but there was nowhere to go, no meetings to attend, no deals to close, no fires to put out. I'd sit in my penthouse apartment, looking out at the city skyline, and wonder what the hell I was supposed to do with myself. I tried traveling, bought a yacht and sailed around the Mediterranean, visited every country I'd always said I'd see someday. But traveling alone isn't really traveling. It's just being lonely in different locations. I'd sit at sidewalk cafes in Paris or on beaches in Thailand, surrounded by couples and families, and I felt like a ghost watching other people live their lives. I tried philanthropy, started a foundation, donated millions to education and health care. It felt good to help people, but it was just another kind of transaction. Write a check, attend a gala, get your name on a building. It didn't fill the emptiness inside me. I thought about reaching out to Maggie, not to win her back. That ship had sailed decades ago. But maybe we could be friends. Maybe we could have coffee sometime and talk about our daughter, our grandchildren, the life we used to share. But what would I say? Hi, remember me? The guy who chose money over you for 24 years? Want to catch up? She'd moved on, built a new life with Robert. They'd been married for 8 years by then, and from what Sarah told me, they were genuinely happy. Maggie had found what she'd been looking for all along. Someone who was present. Someone who chose her every single day. In 2005, I got another call that shattered what was left of my world. Maggie had been diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, stage 3. The doctors were optimistic, but it would be a long fight, Sarah called to tell me. I could hear the fear in her voice, even though she was trying to sound strong. How is she? I asked. Scared, but determined. Robert's been amazing. He took early retirement so he can take care of her full time. Of course he did. Robert understood what I'd never figured out, that the people you love are more important than anything else, more important than money, more important than career, more important than your own plans and ambitions. Can I visit her? I asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I don't know, Dad. Let me ask her. She called back the next day. Maggie was willing to see me, but just once, just to talk. I flew to Ohio the next week, took a commercial flight, because somehow flying my private jet to see my ex-wife, who was battling cancer, felt obscene. I rented a car at the airport and drove to her house, the same house she'd bought after our divorce. Small, modest, nothing like the mansion we'd shared. Robert answered the door. He was smaller than I'd expected, quiet, gentle, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at me for a long moment, then extended his hand. Bill, he said simply. She's in the garden. I walked through their house, noticing the photos on the walls. Pictures of Maggie and Robert traveling, laughing, celebrating anniversaries. Pictures of Sarah's children, my grandchildren, that I barely knew. Pictures of a life lived together, day by day, moment by moment. Maggie was sitting on a bench in her garden wearing a scarf to cover her hair loss from chemotherapy. She looked fragile, but her eyes were still that same bright green I remembered from our wedding day. Hello, Bill, she said. Hello, Maggie. I sat down next to her on the bench. We were quiet for a while, looking at her roses. She'd always loved roses. Even back in our tiny apartment, she'd kept a small rose bush on the fire escape. These are beautiful, I said. Robert planted them for me when we first moved in. He tends them when I'm too tired to do it myself. Of course he did. Sarah told me about the cancer, I said. I'm sorry, she nodded. It's been difficult, but I'm not facing it alone. That was meant for me. A gentle reminder that when she'd needed me most, during those years when our marriage was falling apart, she'd been facing everything alone. Maggie, I said, I need to tell you something. I need to apologize. She turned to look at me. Bill, we've been divorced for over 20 years. Apologies won't change what happened. I know, but I need to say it anyway. I was wrong. About everything. I thought success meant providing for you financially. I thought if I could just make enough money, if I could just achieve enough, you'd be proud of me and everything would be perfect. I was proud of you, she said quietly. I was always proud of you, but I needed more than financial security. I needed a partner. I needed someone who was present in our daily life, not just our bank account. I know that now, but I was too stupid and too selfish to understand it then. We sat in silence again. A bird landed on one of her rose bushes and she smiled watching it. Do you remember our first apartment? She asked, above the bakery. Every detail, the way it smelled like bread in the morning, the creaky floorboards, our little kitchen table where we'd sit and talk for hours. Those were the happiest years of my life, she said. We had nothing, but we had everything. I'm 86 years old now. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I wake up every morning in an empty penthouse, surrounded by the trophies of a life lived backward. If you're young and driven and convinced that success is measured in dollars, please learn from my mistakes. Your spouse won't wait forever. Your children won't stay children. The people who love you today might not love you tomorrow if you keep choosing everything else over them, because at the end of your life, when you're sitting alone with your achievements and your bank statements, you'll realize that none of it matters if you have nobody to share it with.